Every single one of us has a story we tell ourselves about our career. It's that little voice in our head, that internal monologue that explains our wins, our losses, and what we think we're truly capable of. It's the voice that, for better or worse, defines who we are at work. And that story, it feels like the absolute truth, doesn't it? It shapes our confidence, the choices we make, and our whole sense of what's even possible. But I want you to just hang with me for a second and consider a pretty wild idea. What if that core story, what if it's just a piece of fiction, a carefully constructed narrative that you've mistaken for a fact? Maybe it's a protective shield you built a long time ago, one you don't even need anymore. Okay, let's really get into this and figure out what's going on inside our professional minds. To get started, we've got to put a name to this thing. Psychologists have a term for it, our narrative identity. And honestly, it's kind of like the operating system for our entire career. Think of it like a mental scrapbook of all your professional memories and what you've decided they mean. It's not just a list of facts, right? It's an interpretation. It's the lens you use to see every single meeting, every project, every promotion, or, every time you didn't get the promotion. And that lens, well, it determines pretty much everything. So if these stories are just our take on things, why do they so often feel, kind of negative? Why are we so quick to tell ourselves we're not a leader, or not strategic enough, or just not good enough? Turns out, our brains are actually wired to do this. And here's the wild part. These aren't bugs in your system. They're features. Seriously. If you believe you're not a leader, confirmation bias will make you laser-focused on every time you followed someone else's lead, while totally ignoring the times you stepped up. Feeling anxious? Emotional filtering can twist minor feedback into a sign of impending doom. These shortcuts build our stories without us even noticing. And this, right here, is the absolute key. Our brains crave a story that makes sense. A stable, even unflattering story about who we are feels way safer and more predictable than the messy, complicated, ambiguous truth. For the brain, safety almost always wins over accuracy. So when you peel it all back, what are these stories really doing? They're a form of psychological self-defense. If you tell yourself, oh, that success was just luck, you're shielding yourself from the pressure of having to do it again. If you believe you can't handle a huge project, you protect yourself from the sting of potentially failing at it. These stories are serving a purpose. All right, let's bring this down to earth. Take a look at these. Do any of them sound familiar? Maybe hit a little close to home? That feeling that you have to constantly prove yourself? Or the idea that your value is tied completely to your last achievement? These are the scripts playing on a loop, powered by those deeper psychological patterns. Look, living inside these familiar stories might feel safe, it might feel comfortable, but that safety, it comes with a massive price tag. Believing a fictional story about yourself has real, tangible consequences for your career. Think about it. When your internal story is off base, your whole self-assessment is built on a shaky foundation. You can't accurately talk about your value in an interview or a performance review. You start dodging the very challenges that would help you grow, and you get stuck. Anchored to an old version of yourself, completely missing the person you've actually become. But honestly, this is the real danger. When you believe a negative story deep down, you start to subconsciously act in ways that make it come true. You don't speak up in that meeting. You don't volunteer for that project. And in doing so, you prove your own false story right, trapping yourself in a vicious cycle. Okay, so this is where we turn the corner. How do we break out of this cycle? This isn't about wishful thinking or just repeating positive affirmations. This is about becoming a detective in your own career, and every good investigation needs a clear process. This is all about gathering evidence. First, you have to name the story. Literally write it down. The story I tell myself is. Then, you become a researcher. You start hunting for the hard data, the actual behaviors that contradict it. Find specific moments where you were strategic or you did lead a team effectively. The key here is to observe yourself like a scientist, with curiosity, not judgment. And then finally, you rewrite your story based on the facts you've collected. See, this is the fundamental shift you're trying to make. You're moving away from these sweeping, emotional verdicts like, I'm just not strategic, and moving toward objective, behavioral evidence like, I designed and executed a 3-month project plan. One is a feeling, a biased interpretation. The other, that's just data. You're building a new case for yourself,
one based on what you've actually done.
And doing all this work, it leads to a final and honestly, the most empowering idea of all. Your professional identity isn't set in stone. It's meant to evolve.
Now, we have to be real for a second. Letting go of an old story, even a painful one, can feel scary. It was familiar. It was predictable in its own way. Challenging that story means stepping into uncertainty. And yeah, that takes real courage.
But you know what? This is what growth feels like. Changing your internal story to fit the new evidence isn't a sign that you were wrong before. It's a sign that you're learning, that you're maturing. It is a strength, not a weakness. So, if you take away just one thing from all this, let it be this. The story you've been telling yourself about your career, about what you can and can't do, about your limits, it is not a final verdict handed down from on high. It's a first draft, and like any good writer, you have the power to pick up the pen, look at the evidence, and start the rewrite. Your entire career is waiting for you to do it.